There are fears that parts of America's largest national forest could be destroyed if environmental protections are lifted. The Tongass National Forest in Alaska has been home to eagles and brown bears for hundreds of years.
Footage recently captured in Alaska's vast, untamed wilderness has surfaced, and it's shattering everything we thought we knew about the region. For years, Alaska's wilderness has been revered for its beauty, mystery, and isolation. But what was recorded on camera has revealed something far more disturbing. What was once a place of serene solitude has now become the epicenter of a terrifying discovery that no one was prepared for. The footage shows eerie encounters, unexplained phenomena, and clues to a deeper, darker secret hiding in plain sight. What was recorded in the Alaskan wilderness that has left experts and adventurers alike in shock? The truth that's come to light is something no one could have predicted, and it's forcing us to rethink everything about this unforgiving land. Stay tuned as we uncover the chilling details that no one was ready for. Alaska's wilderness has always been a place of awe and fear, a land where humans are mere visitors, dwarfed by the size and majesty of nature. With vast, untamed forests, towering mountains, and glaciers that stretch for miles, it's a place that has always sparked the imagination of adventurers, survivalists, and explorers alike. But beneath its beauty lies a more sinister side, a side few have ever dared to uncover. For centuries, Alaska has been home to indigenous peoples who have lived in harmony with the land. But even they have whispered about the dark and hidden places in the wilderness. Ancient legends speak of strange creatures, inexplicable disappearances, and mysterious forces that have always lurked just beyond the known world. For most, these stories were just that, legends, folklore passed down through generations. But in recent years, something has changed. What began as isolated accounts from hunters, hikers, and explorers gradually grew into a pattern. Reports began surfacing of strange lights in the sky, eerie sounds in the forests, and inexplicable movements in the snow. At first, these reports were dismissed as exaggerations, the product of overactive imaginations in the wilderness. But as more and more people shared similar experiences, it became clear that something was happening in Alaska's wilderness, a pattern of activity that no one could explain. The footage that eventually surfaced was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just another campfire story or a strange coincidence. It was the undeniable evidence that something truly unexplainable was happening in the wilds of Alaska. Hikers who were simply passing through had captured strange shadows moving in the distance. Others heard inexplicable sounds echoing through the trees. Something was out there, something that could no longer be ignored. The world was about to learn that Alaska's wilderness held a truth no one was prepared to confront. The footage that emerged from Alaska's wilderness was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. Captured by a group of experienced hikers who had ventured deep into the forest, the video began innocuously enough. Shots of pristine snow, towering trees, and the stark beauty of Alaska's untouched wilderness. But then, things took a turn. As the hikers ventured deeper into the forest, strange occurrences began to unfold. First, it was the unsettling silence. The usual sounds of wildlife, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of birds, the wind through the trees, had all but disappeared. In their place was an eerie stillness, the kind that makes you feel as if something is watching you. But it wasn't until they reached a clearing that things got truly bizarre. The hikers, some of the most experienced in the region, described seeing an unusual movement in the distance. At first, they thought it was a moose or a bear, but what they saw didn't match the usual patterns of wildlife. The figure moved erratically, as if it were not quite in sync with the surrounding environment, almost as if it was glitching between frames. As they zoomed in with their cameras, the figure seemed to vanish, only to reappear in a different spot moments later. The hikers' nervous chatter filled the audio of the video, but there was no mistaking the terror in their voices as they realized they were no longer alone. But the most disturbing part came later, when the hikers reviewed the footage. They noticed strange, faint shapes in the background, shadows that didn't match any visible objects, figures that moved independently of the hikers, and lights flickering in the distance, hovering above the ground. These strange anomalies, captured in high definition, were unlike anything they had ever encountered. As they continued to review the footage, it became clear something was in the wilderness with them, something not entirely of this world. The footage was immediately sent to experts in wildlife, technology, and even paranormal studies, but no one could offer an explanation. The images were too clear to be dismissed as mere distortion or trick of the light. The strange figures, the unexplainable movements, and the eerie presence they all felt. No one had any answers, only more questions. The truth behind the footage was beginning to emerge, and it was far more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. As the footage from Alaska's wilderness spread, it quickly gained attention, not just from the hiking community, but from experts across various fields. Wildlife biologists, physicists, and even paranormal investigators weighed in, trying to make sense of what was captured. But no one had a clear answer. The footage, while unsettling, wasn't the only source of concern. More hikers, hunters, and explorers began to share their own accounts of bizarre occurrences they had experienced in Alaska's remote regions. Some spoke of hearing low, guttural growls echoing through the trees with no visible source. Others reported seeing brief flashes of light in the sky that moved erratically, unlike any known aircraft or natural phenomenon. One particularly chilling account came from a seasoned hunter who had been tracking game near a secluded part of the wilderness. He described feeling as though he was being followed, but every time he turned around, there was no one there. The strange sensation intensified when he noticed large, inexplicable footprints in the snow, footprints that didn't match any known animal in the area. When the hunter followed the tracks, they led to an area of the forest where the trees appeared to be unnaturally spaced, as if something had deliberately created a path. The footprints stopped abruptly in the middle of the clearing, leaving him with a sense of dread that stayed with him long after he left. Similar reports continued to pour in, each one more disturbing than the last. Some hikers recounted seeing tall, humanoid figures that moved just outside the range of their vision, always staying at the edges of the forest, but never approaching close enough to be clearly seen. One hiker described hearing whispers, voices in the wind that seemed to speak his name, but when he turned, there was no one in sight. The growing number of these reports forced experts to reconsider what was happening in Alaska's wilderness. Was it a new type of predator? An unexplained natural phenomenon? Or was there something more sinister at work? Something that defied explanation? The growing tension and confusion among hikers only fueled the speculation. The wilderness, once seen as a place of solitude and escape, had turned into a land filled with fear and uncertainty. The truth was becoming harder to ignore, and with each new report, the mystery deepened. What was truly lurking in the wilds of Alaska, and why was it terrifying everyone who ventured there? With the footage gaining widespread attention, experts from all walks of life began to weigh in, offering various theories in an attempt to explain the strange occurrences unfolding in Alaska's wilderness. Wildlife biologists were the first to voice their concerns, suggesting that the unusual sightings could be the result of rare animal behavior. but even they struggled to provide a convincing explanation. The figure seen in the footage didn't resemble any known animal in the region. Its movements were too erratic, its shape too distorted to be something as simple as a bear or moose. The biologists, familiar with the region's wildlife, couldn't identify any species that matched the strange behaviors described by the hikers. The next group to weigh in were physicists, intrigued by the strange lights and anomalies captured in the footage. Some suggested that the phenomena could be caused by environmental factors, such as unusual electromagnetic activity or a rare atmospheric phenomenon that distorted light and caused objects to appear in the peripheral vision of the hikers. While plausible, this theory failed to explain the more sinister aspects of the footage: the figures moving in the trees and the unexplained sounds that seemed to follow the hikers. As the footage spread, paranormal investigators began to take an interest. With their expertise in unexplained phenomena, they speculated that the strange happenings could be linked to something far more mysterious, perhaps a manifestation of some supernatural force, or a thin place in the fabric of reality, where the boundaries between the physical world and otherworldly entities could be crossed. They pointed to the reports of whispers in the wind and the figures that seemed to appear and disappear in the blink of an eye, arguing that what was being captured on film wasn't something easily explained by science. These theories, while intriguing, only deepened the mystery. No one could agree on what was happening, and each new theory seemed to raise more questions than it answered. But one thing was clear: the footage had forced people to reconsider everything they thought they knew about Alaska's wilderness. The growing number of accounts, combined with the eerie footage, painted a picture of a place where the natural world and the unknown seemed to collide. But were these just the results of overactive imaginations, or was there something truly unexplainable happening in the heart of Alaska? As the investigation into the footage continued, the truth seemed to slip further and further out of reach. As the theories continued to swirl, the public's fear of Alaska's wilderness grew. What was once a destination for hikers, adventurers, and nature lovers was now becoming a place fraught with anxiety and uncertainty. The footage, along with the increasing number of strange reports, had shifted the perception of the region from a tranquil paradise to a place of potential danger. Social media platforms were flooded with discussions, with some dismissing the footage as a hoax or a product of overactive imaginations, while others became more and more convinced that something far darker was at play. For those who had hiked or camped in Alaska's remote areas, the fear was palpable. More hikers began sharing their own unnerving experiences, many of which mirrored the strange occurrences seen in the footage. Some described feeling an oppressive presence, a sensation that something was always watching them from the trees. Others reported seeing figures moving in the distance, just out of sight, and hearing footsteps behind them that didn't belong to anyone in their group. The stories were starting to pile up, and it was clear that a pattern was forming. Even some of the most seasoned Alaskan adventurers, those who had spent years exploring the wilderness, admitted they were starting to question their own safety. The feeling of being followed, of encountering something that didn't quite belong, was beginning to resonate with more and more people. The wilderness, that had once been a symbol of escape from the modern world, was now the source of growing panic. Theories continued to evolve. While some remained convinced that the strange phenomena were the result of natural but rare occurrences, others leaned into darker possibilities. Some believed the phenomena could be linked to an ancient force, a spiritual entity that had been disturbed by human presence in the area. Native legends of spirits and guardian beings who inhabited the Alaskan wilderness started to gain attention, with some suggesting that these forces were being awakened by the increasing numbers of hikers and explorers. Others theorized that the recent wave of strange encounters was the result of human activity, perhaps illegal operations taking place deep in the wilderness, such as poaching or drug trafficking. The possibility of human interference added a new layer of fear, especially as reports of shadowy figures in the woods and unmarked campsites began to surface. No matter the explanation, one thing was clear. The unknown had taken root in Alaska's wilderness, and its grip on the region was only growing tighter. As the tension surrounding Alaska's wilderness deepened, the hiking and outdoor communities found themselves gripped by a growing sense of fear and uncertainty. The once untouchable appeal of the Alaskan wild, a place that symbolized freedom and adventure, was now becoming a place of hesitation and dread. Many who had once dreamed of conquering Alaska's trails were now questioning their plans. For seasoned adventurers, the idea of turning back was unthinkable. Yet, as the strange occurrences continued to escalate and more hikers shared their unsettling stories, many began to reconsider. Online forums and social media were flooded with posts from people who had previously viewed the wilderness as their second home, now voicing their doubts. Some shared their fear of encountering the strange figures in the trees or the eerie whispers that seemed to follow them, while others recounted moments when the very essence of Alaska's wilderness felt unnaturally oppressive. What had once been a place for self-reflection and connection to nature was now associated with a growing feeling of being hunted, of not being alone in the vast emptiness. Even experienced Alaskan guides and park rangers who had spent years leading others into the wilderness were starting to show signs of concern. Some began to avoid certain sections of the wilderness known for their high levels of unexplained activity. Others, who once had complete faith in the safety of Alaska's trails, were now feeling the weight of uncertainty. The fear wasn't just about strange shadows in the trees or fleeting glimpses of movement in the distance. It was the feeling that the wilderness, the very land that had once offered peace, was now becoming a place that could not be trusted. More and more hikers, unsure whether they were simply imagining things or if the growing number of reports were signs of a deeper, darker truth, decided to abandon their plans altogether. The fear of the unknown was too great. What had been a once-in-a-lifetime journey was now being redefined by the potential for danger. With each new cancellation and every report of strange happenings, the growing panic was palpable. The allure of the Alaskan wilderness, for the first time, was beginning to fade into something more ominous, and for many, the wilderness was no longer a place to explore. It was a place to avoid. As the fear surrounding Alaska's wilderness continued to grow, the once sacred reputation of the region began to shift dramatically. What was once seen as the ultimate destination for adventure seekers and nature lovers had now become a symbol of uncertainty and danger. The change in perception was not just limited to the hiking community, it had reached the broader public. Alaska's wilderness, long considered an untamed paradise and a sanctuary for those seeking peace and solitude, was now being viewed as a place where the unknown thrived, a place where the boundaries between the natural world and something more ominous had blurred. For generations, Alaska had been revered for its raw, unspoiled beauty. It was a place where people could push their limits, escape the pressures of modern life, and connect with nature in its purest form. But as strange figures, inexplicable sounds, and terrifying footage dominated the headlines, the allure of the wilderness was being overshadowed by the growing fear of what lay hidden within it. Tourists, once flocking to Alaska in droves, began canceling their trips. Adventure companies, once thriving off the promise of unforgettable Alaskan experiences, saw bookings plummet. Even those who had once considered themselves seasoned explorers began to wonder if the wilderness they had come to love was now something entirely different. A place no longer defined by its beauty, but by the fear that had taken root in its very heart. The fear wasn't just about what hikers were seeing or hearing in the woods. It was the uncertainty that now surrounded Alaska as a whole. What had been a place of refuge and adventure was now a place that many began to see as a warning. The reputation of the Alaskan wilderness, once synonymous with freedom and the spirit of exploration, was now marred by suspicion and dread. The impact on the tourism industry and the outdoor community was undeniable. As more and more people shared their unsettling experiences, fewer were willing to take the risk of experiencing the unknown. The very thing that had drawn people to Alaska for centuries, its wild, unpredictable nature, was now the thing that drove them away. Alaska's wilderness, once an icon of adventure, was now a symbol of caution, and for many, the legacy of this untamed land would never be the same. After months of fear, confusion, and mounting speculation, the truth behind the strange occurrences in Alaska's wilderness was finally uncovered. The truth, however, was more disturbing and complex than anyone could have ever imagined. The growing reports of shadowy figures, unexplainable sounds, and strange movements in the wilderness were not the result of a new predator or even a supernatural force. Instead, it was something far more insidious and human in origin. A series of investigations, spurred by the overwhelming number of reports and the shocking footage, revealed a deeply disturbing reality. Alaska's wilderness had become the home of a covert operation that had been taking place under the radar for years. Hidden deep within the remote sections of the forest, a group had set up operations, using the dense landscape as a cover for illegal activities. These individuals, armed and dangerous, had taken advantage of the isolation of the wilderness to carry out their operations, and their presence was now the source of the strange occurrences reported by hikers and adventurers. The figures in the footage were not cryptids or wild animals. They were human, deliberately moving in and out of the hiker's sight, always staying just beyond reach. The eerie whispers in the wind, the strange shadows darting through the trees, and the feeling of being watched were all part of the intimidation tactics used to keep people away. It was not just about keeping their activities secret. It was about creating fear, making the wilderness so unsettling that it would deter anyone from venturing too close. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community. The wilderness that had been a symbol of freedom, self-reliance, and adventure was now a place of fear and danger. The hunters, hikers, and adventurers who had long cherished Alaska's rugged beauty were now faced with the terrifying truth that they were not alone in the wild. The realization that human interference, not some supernatural force, had been causing the terror on the trail was jarring. The wilderness, once a sanctuary, was now a battleground between those seeking to protect the land and those willing to exploit it for their own gain. The aftermath of this revelation left a deep scar on Alaska's legacy. The fear that had taken root in the hearts of adventurers was not just about the immediate dangers of hidden figures in the woods. It was the awareness that something had been lurking in the wilderness for far too long. For many, the magic of Alaska had been lost, replaced by a sense of vulnerability and distrust. The wilderness was no longer just a symbol of natural beauty. It had become a reminder of the hidden dangers that lay beneath its serene surface. While authorities moved in to investigate and clear the area, the damage had already been done. The fear that had spread throughout the community would leave its mark on Alaska for years to come. The Alaskan wilderness, once seen as the ultimate destination for those seeking adventure, had become a place of caution. And for those who had once loved it, the wilderness would never be the same again.